My name is Isla Mowbray. My campaign colour is gold, yellow gold, and my slogan is "I'm with Isla."
And who's your manager and your political affiliation?
So I'm managed by Switch, quite a large team, as well as SUDS President Alice Stafford, and I don't have a political affiliation. I've thought a lot about running for board and why I want to run, and ultimately I've been really lucky to benefit from the community and kind of performing arts scene at USyd, and it's given me so much, and I've also just seen how strong a community it is. And really I just want to do everything I can to support that community, and I think there's a lot that the USU actually has scope to provide these really strong student networks on campus that I really want to contribute to and help them through the means of the USU. And yeah.
Your favourite book?
I really like The Overstory by Richard Powers. It's a really great kind of ecological book, going into the forests and yeah.
Favourite movie?
I really like the documentary by Maya Newell called In My Blood It Runs. It's really fantastic.
Favourite club or society?
Oh, it has to be SUDS, the Drama Society, for sure, yeah.
Favourite Pulp article?
Ooh, I think it has to be best hot chocolate on campus and where to find it.
Your favourite USU outlet?
I think Courtyard, just because I'm there a lot and the Cellar Theatre is just down there, so just go between the two a lot, yeah. My three most important policies is number one, more resources for clubs and societies. And within this, I think that ticks off quite a lot of things. So this means like improving room bookings, improving the spaces which are actually being used. My second most important policy would be transparency, and I know this is kind of said quite a lot, but I think there are tangible things that can be done to improve transparency for USU. Like the board minutes haven't been updated on the website since like 14th of December last year, and I think that's really unreasonable, especially when these are decisions which are impacting and influencing the student community, and we would probably like to stand up for these decisions and maybe possibly oppose them if we were actually told about them in advance. So I'd also like to see the USU possibly putting out like an agenda before meetings, because otherwise these things are being discussed which do have an impact on the functioning of clubs and societies, which, yeah, we're just not told about, so we can't do anything about it, and suddenly we're being affected by these decisions. And then my third most important policy would be to improve communication and connection between the USU and between clubs and societies. I think we've seen, like I said, from the transparency stuff there, we've seen quite a big lack of communication between the USU and clubs and societies. And on top of that, I think they can do a lot more to kind of create streams of communication between each club and society, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to perhaps like collaborate between these different student organizations. Because one thing that I also did want to touch on is that, like, the way I see it is you've got these student groups, right, and they are putting so much effort in, they're putting so much like free time to build up these really strong and incredible spaces which really offer a lot of support and a sense of belonging and community to the people who join them. And ultimately, I don't think the USU can just jump into a society and like suddenly improve it. Like the societies a lot of the time are going really well, but there are a lot of things I think that they can just be supported kind of in minor ways by the USU to just help the functioning better and just to improve the functioning of the society. So yeah, but it goes back to that thing of creating that channel of communication so that the societies can actually make the USU aware of the things that they need improving. Because I think what we're seeing now is this lack of communication, and I'd really be seeking to improve that through things like panels and forums. And I know the Performing Arts Forum kind of between the USU and Performing Arts Clubs and Societies happened the other day. but action points need to be taken from that. It's one thing to have a forum and a panel, and I think that sounds great, but what we really need to see happening is solid action points happening, and we need to see accountability from the board directors that these things are actually going to be followed through on. And that's what I'd really be hoping to set up if I were to be elected. I think it ties into what I was just saying about this lack of communication and this lack of possibly care as well. And I'm sure, you know, each of the board directors, they want to give back, and they will kind of want to see this positive change happen. But I think it's quite hard to cater for all the separate kind of communities within USyd, kind of from that level. And I think what we need to see more of is, yeah, like I said, accountability. And my other criticism of the USU would be that I think, and this ties back to kind of what I was saying before, but I think like the USU is kind of seen as like up here, and then clubs and societies are all down here kind of thing. Whereas I think it should be seen as is clubs and societies are the ones who are really doing the job of upholding student life and are really putting in the effort to build these communities and foster friendships and allow people to feel like they're attached to something at university, because I think uni can be quite an isolating place for a lot of people. And I really just want to see a space where there is more person-to-person connection, and I think it's really important that the club execs of societies do have an inroads with board directors so that they can have that communication and that we can work to support and uplift each other. Because another criticism that I kind of have is I think we've seen this over-corporatization of the USU over the last few years. And I don't know, when I walk into an event like Pulp Fest or another kind of USU event, and I see all this branding, you know, the USU banners and this and that, I'm like, I get that branding's important, but I think it's quite disillusioning when you walk in, there's like hardly anyone even there sometimes. And you just see all these banners and you're like, oh, it just feels quite corporate and quite isolating. And I think what generates an actual sense of connection for people is to see people that they've worked with or people that they know and their friends, and to actually go with groups and attend these events, because just putting them on as some kind of like corporate event for the evening, I don't think people actually feel a sense of connection to that. So I would like to see events and, you know, programs which are initiated by the USU which actually kind of take into account what's best for a club and society and what is truly going to engage people, and how do we solve this kind of sense of isolation and detachment from the student community which is meant to be serving us.
So you mentioned that the USU is seen as kind of above clubs and societies. How would you tangibly rearrange that relationship?
I think there's a lot that can be done to tangibly rearrange the relationship between clubs and societies and the USU, and to try and eliminate that sense of hierarchy, because I think what would be optimal to see would be the problems within the clubs and societies really being addressed by the USU. And for this to happen, I think, as I said before, there needs to be a clearer line of communication between, you know, the execs of these societies and the USU and the board directors who are making the decisions which affect these societies. I think you can do this in a few ways. One of them would be to host more forums and just more kind of public debates about where USU are dedicating their time to and what resources they're allowing for the clubs and societies. And then I think past this, we need to make sure that the forums and the panels are actually doing something productive and that something is really going to come from them. So there needs to be some sense of accountability from the USU's end in terms of what they're saying they can do and actually managing to do that. And I think it comes from also giving more power to the execs of clubs and societies and giving them more responsibilities and duties in terms of what's actually going on within the USU, because if anyone has a real claim in the decisions which are being made within the USU, then it is the clubs and societies executives. And I think this comes down to, again, the setup is okay, and there are small things that we can be doing within the setup. So I know as of right now, a large problem that clubs and societies have is just a lack of correspondence. They'll be sending emails to whoever it is within the USU, and often the emails aren't replied to, and they're not really heard out. So we need to make sure that, you know, the people who are meant to be working for these student groups are really working for the student groups and are getting on top of emails. It's those small lines of communication which actually make a big difference in terms of running events and running programs. I think we need to see just, a lot more response from the USU, and I think we kind of need this value and attitude shift towards, you know, what can the USU do for clubs and societies? And it shouldn't be this thing of a club and society going to the USU saying, can we have this? And the USU kind of being like, oh, you know, we're only going to give you this much. And it kind of being this weird, like, well, we're up here and we're going to just, like, you know, kind of hand things out like that. It should be, oh, you want to run this event, you want to run this program? Well, what are the best ways that we can do to support you in running that? So I think we need to see a lot more of an active response to the passionate students, which already are in the student community. And it's just thinking, what can we do to really support them? Yeah, Kath's sock sign on Eastern Avenue was extremely discriminatory and offensive, and I condemn it in every way possible. I think it's extremely harmful to the student community, and especially disabled people. I think that sign should never have gone up, and it's just outrageously offensive. In terms of the USU's response, I think when it comes to these public, horrible open acts of discrimination, they need to take a firm stance, because this university needs to be a safe space for all, a space free of discrimination. So I think it's very important that the USU would condemn this on a public level. And further on, I think they would need to issue CathSoc with an official warning of some kind, because this behaviour is just not acceptable in any way whatsoever.
What would that warning look like?
Look, I think that warning would look something along the lines of, if this kind of open discrimination is continued, then there'll have to be some kind of real consequence on the line. Look, I think that politics plays an integral part in every aspect of our lives. I'm someone who does believe that what we believe politically does kind of align with what our morals and our values are. So in that respect, I think that politics does play a part in the decisions made on board and who's going to be on board. And as much as I think some people argue maybe against that, I just think it's extremely important to recognise that a left-wing and progressive board is what's going to work best for the student community and student organisations at large, because I think a left-wing and progressive board looks like one that fundamentally cares about the student community. I think at the root of kind of left-wing politics is a sense of care and a sense of duty towards our communities. And like, I think we, you know, as a left-wing candidate, I just see it that, you know, we're here to uplift and support the work of students that's happening around campus, especially like the work of collectives and, you know, all types of student organisations. So yeah, my politics will definitely inform the decisions that I make on board. And these decisions will be things like, how we respond to things like events like what CathSoc did, and budget distributions, and, you know, whether we're going to support climate strikes, which of course I think the USU should get behind, especially the one coming up on May 21st, the global climate strike. I want to see a lot of support from the USU for that strike. So, yeah.
So given you're openly running as a left-wing candidate, if you were elected, how do you propose that you'll bridge the gap between you and the directors who are maybe on the other side of politics?
I think for mostly that, I hope this year the board will be more left-wing, and I truly think that with a more left-wing board and kind of majority left-wing people, we'll be able to make decisions which align with that politics, and we're actually able to do something, because right now I think there's quite a big conflict of these different opinions and these different political angles and sides on the board, and what we're seeing is not the best decisions being made, and we're seeing decisions which don't benefit the student community, which don't benefit the collectives, and that's because there are some people on board, I think, who don't want to work for those communities, and they don't see the value in those communities. So in terms of bridging that gap, I just hope that majority of the board will be left-wing and will share the same kind of principles and values. I think there are a few ways to approach the COVID recovery plan. I think what COVID did to the university and the student community was really, really terrible. Obviously, we didn't really have a student life last year. And what we saw from that was, I think, people feeling isolated, people feeling lonely, people feeling quite detached. And I don't think we saw enough care from, and I know we were in a crisis and a global pandemic, but I don't think we saw enough care from the USU, and I understand that they were dealing with a host of their own problems within the institution, but I think a lot more could have been done to support clubs and societies. We literally saw reviews being entirely cancelled, and I think now that we're seeing everything start to come back, I know at least for the Drama Society, we've returned to putting on productions and the community's kind of come back. However, we've now seen this change to the funding model, which has meant that we are not getting the same support that we did. And I know for the Musical Theatre Society, Muse, their budget from their funding from the USU is $1,000, where last year or the year before it was something around $7,000. Now for a society like Muse, where their major is $20,000, like they need this kind of funding. They need support from the USU, and I think what we've seen, like the USU is it has a surplus of $55,000 right now, and that money should be going back into the student communities and the groups of people who are working so hard to try and build up spaces of belonging and kind of these creative spaces. So I would definitely look at restructuring the funding model this year, because I think the whole tiered system of funding isn't enough for clubs and societies. And on top of that, I think there's a lot the USU can be doing to support them further. And I think this looks like possibly creating, as I said before, these connections between events that the USU run and clubs and societies, right? Because I think running these events in isolation doesn't really work that well. So I think it comes down to something like, if the USU is putting on an event, then a club and society should be reached out to and said, do you want to participate in this? And how can we kind of facilitate that participation? And through that, I think we'll see like these stronger senses of communities being built up, because the situation right now is that, we've got Suds down in the Cellar Theatre down there, and I love that community, and it's beautiful and it's thriving, but yet we've got, Mad Sock happening over in Elliott Miller and doing all these rehearsals, and that's also a really great community and space. And then I could list all the others as well, but I just think it would be incredible if we could somehow find ways to link these communities and build up that stronger sense of support for each other. And to kind of disintegrate that sense of separation, I think it would be really great to come together. So I've thought of a few ways to do this, and I think this could tie into the COVID recovery plan of regenerating and rebuilding. And I guess it comes down to supporting, because I recognise that these student groups are already doing the regeneration and doing the rebuilding of their clubs and societies. And I put it down to people like the SUDS president, Alice Stafford, and Nancy and Daniel and Chloe, who are giving so much back to their societies. So I really see the USU as a supportive kind of role. And so what does this kind of actual support look like? Well, it could come in the form a creative arts festival. And I've run these ideas by heads of clubs. And of course, I don't want to say anything which, you know, we don't fully check with everyone first that they'd like to participate in, but it could look like something like having a stimulus be put out for some kind of creative performing arts work to SUDS, to MadSoc, and they all respond differently to this stimulus. So maybe it's like a poem or a picture or a color, whatever it is. And they create a short performance based on that. And this is all facilitated, well, at least it's being resourced, or the resources are being given to them from the USU. So like funding, it covers funding and all of that, and spaces. And then we create like a week's performance kind of show. And I think it will tie the societies really well together because they're working on some kind of shared common goal. And they're working from the same stimulus. So I think SUDS people would love to go and see how dancers responded to the same stimulus. And I'm sure like the musicians and dancers would love to see a piece of theatre created from this stimulus. Anyway, that's one of my ideas. Yeah. I think that the USU can be doing a lot more to support international students stuck abroad. The level of support that we're seeing right now is really dismal and not enough. I think it, again, comes down to operating through the societies. I think the societies are our main avenue to really reach out to people and contact people, because I think what the societies do is speak to people on a kind of interest level, and they can engage with things because they are interested in them, right? And so it looks like possibly sending out an email to clubs and societies just to say, and I don't know if there would be like a financial incentive, or mainly it's just, you know, community building, saying how can your society reach out to students who are stuck overseas right now. I know at least for SUDS, within SUDS, last year we ran obviously a lot of Zoom events. And I mean, this is a really great way because, like, for people to engage, because it allows people who are, you know, stuck across the country and the globe to engage with these events. So I guess pulling on that experience that I've had within SUDS in managing these games nights and managing and kind of running these events, I think it would be very reasonable to run something like a USU Zoom games night, right? And then in collaboration with the societies, possibly. And I think it's small, fun events like that, which if you have enough people turning up to, you actually do feel this sense of connection again, and sense of, I mean, like distant belonging to a community, even though you're obviously separated by space. And then obviously, I think there should be more events as well, and just more publicity from the USU's end in terms of translating things into other languages. I think that's really important for accessibility and inclusivity. So the board candidate, that I'd most like to work with would be Talita Goyle. I really strongly identify and align with a lot of her policies, and I think she's got a really strong vision. Obviously, she shares the same political beliefs as I do, and values, and I think if we were to both get elected to board, we'd be able to really achieve the visions that we both have. As well as that, I think Cole is a really great candidate as well. I think we share a lot of the same ideas about what we want to achieve. In terms of who I'd least like to work with, I think there's a group of candidates who are aligned with the Liberal Party, who I just think would have a lot of clashes on what we want to achieve within the USU and also how we respond to specific things and events. So I wouldn't want to work with them. Obviously, I'd like to see someone who's left-wing and principled and shares the same political views that I do, and will lead the USU in a really collaborative and and dynamic and accessible way. And I think that person would be obviously Prudence. I just think she's an incredible person, and she'd do a fantastic job of being president. There's also Ruby Lotz, who is a really principled left-wing candidate as well. Sorry, not candidate, board director.